Join me as I dive into the Supreme Court's hints at supporting Biden's crackdown on ghost guns and see if I can break down the legal implications in just 10 minutes. In recent years, the rise of ghost guns, untraceable firearms assembled from kits or 3D printed parts, has ignited a new debate over gun control in the United States. Unlike commercially manufactured guns, ghost guns lack serial numbers, making them nearly impossible to trace when used in crimes. This growing trend has led to a surge in unregulated firearms, with law enforcement agencies reporting a tenfold increase in ghost gun recoveries between 2016 and 2022. In response, the Biden administration implemented new regulations requiring ghost gun kits to be treated like traditional firearms, complete with serial numbers and background checks for buyers. However, these new rules have faced legal challenges from gun rights groups, pushing the issue to the U.S. Supreme Court. As the court considers whether these homemade gun kits should fall under the same regulatory framework as other firearms, the ruling could have profound implications for gun laws and public safety across the nation. The central problem at the heart of the current legal challenge is whether ghost guns, kits or parts that can be easily assembled into fully functioning firearms, should be regulated under the same framework as traditional firearms. The Biden administration's new rule requires these kits to include serial numbers and be sold only after a background check, as is mandated for commercially manufactured guns. However, gun rights advocates argue that these regulations overstep the boundaries of existing law. The key legal issue is the interpretation of the 1968 Gun Control Act, which mandates background checks, sales records, and serial numbers for firearms sold by manufacturers and dealers. The challenge brought before the U.S. Supreme Court questions whether these laws apply to ghost guns, which do not arrive fully assembled but can be quickly and easily converted into functioning firearms. Critics of the regulation, including several gun rights groups, contend that the kits are not firearms until assembled, and thus, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, has overreached by reinterpreting the law. Proponents of the rule, including the Biden administration, argue that ghost guns pose an immediate public safety threat. These weapons are easily accessible to individuals who might otherwise be barred from purchasing a traditional firearm, as no serial numbers or background checks are required to obtain the kits. Law enforcement agencies have expressed growing concern about the increasing presence of ghost guns in criminal activities, with over 20,000 suspected ghost guns recovered in 2022 alone, a dramatic increase over the past several years. The challenge for the Supreme Court lies in balancing the intent of the 1968 law with the evolving landscape of firearms technology and the pressing need for public safety measures. The debate over ghost guns has evolved into a complex legal and social challenge, highlighting the growing tensions between public safety concerns and Second Amendment rights. Ghost guns, homemade firearms assembled from kits or 3D printed parts, pose unique challenges because they are untraceable, lack serial numbers, and can be made without background checks. The rise in their use has sparked widespread concern, as law enforcement agencies struggle to control the spread of these weapons, especially in criminal activities. The Biden administration's 2022 rule sought to address this problem by closing the loophole that allowed ghost guns to bypass federal firearm regulations. Under this new rule, ghost gun kits would be treated as firearms under the 1968 Gun Control Act, requiring manufacturers to include serial numbers on parts and purchasers to undergo background checks. The rule attempts to hold ghost guns to the same standards as commercially made firearms, bridging the gap created by technological advances in firearms manufacturing. However, the rule was met with fierce opposition from gun rights groups, who argue that it overextends the federal government's regulatory reach. Central to their challenge is the question of whether the 1968 Gun Control Act was ever intended to apply to firearm kits. The law mandates that fully assembled firearms must carry serial numbers and require background checks, but it does not explicitly address kits or unfinished parts. Gun rights advocates argue that a kit or partially assembled firearm is not yet a gun, and therefore should not be regulated as such. The Supreme Court's examination of the case focuses on how to interpret the 1968 law in light of modern gun technology. The question the court faces is whether the ATF acted within its authority in reinterpreting the law to include ghost guns. Justices on both sides of the ideological spectrum have raised important questions. Chief Justice John Roberts questioned the usefulness of selling unfinished gun parts if their only purpose is to create a fully functioning firearm. This highlights the core of the government's argument that ghost gun kits are functionally firearms because they are sold with the intention of being easily assembled into operational weapons. One of the most compelling aspects of the government's argument, articulated by Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar, is that ghost gun kits serve no other purpose besides being assembled into functional firearms. This distinguishes them from car parts or other hobbyist materials, which are sold for multiple potential uses. Prelogar emphasized that ghost gun kits are marketed as ridiculously easy to assemble, with some taking as little as 15 minutes to create a fully functional firearm. This ease of assembly, combined with the lack of oversight, poses a significant public safety risk, particularly as these guns are increasingly found at crime scenes. The key moment in the Supreme Court's deliberation on ghost guns came when Chief Justice John Roberts, a pivotal figure in the court, directly challenged the argument put forth by gun rights advocates. In questioning the purpose of selling unfinished firearm components, such as a gun receiver that merely requires drilling a hole to become a functional firearm, Roberts sharply addressed the fundamental issue: whether these parts should be regulated as firearms under existing law. What is the purpose of selling a receiver without the holes drilled in it? Roberts asked, signaling his skepticism of the argument that these unfinished parts are not firearms. This question was critical because it underscored the intent behind the sale of ghost gun kits. Roberts' line of questioning highlighted the fact that these kits are marketed with the clear purpose of becoming fully functioning firearms, even if they are technically sold as parts. This exchange reflected a turning point in the case. While conservative justices have historically leaned toward protecting gun rights, Roberts' probing suggested that the court was taking seriously the government's argument that ghost guns should be regulated. His framing of the issue seemed to side with the idea that these kits, though unassembled, are in practice no different from traditional firearms once they are fully operational. Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Brett Kavanaugh, two other key conservative voices, also indicated openness to this perspective, further suggesting that the Biden administration's position might receive favorable consideration. The Supreme Court's deliberation on the regulation of ghost guns marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over gun control and the limits of federal regulation. At the heart of the case is the Biden administration's rule that requires ghost gun kits, untraceable firearms that can be assembled at home, to be treated like traditional firearms, with serial numbers and background checks. This rule challenges the status quo, as ghost guns have largely bypassed federal regulation due to their sale as kits rather than fully assembled firearms. Gun rights advocates argue that the rule overreaches, claiming that the 1968 Gun Control Act was never intended to regulate parts or kits. However, the government contends that ghost guns pose a serious public safety threat, as they are increasingly used in crimes and are difficult for law enforcement to trace. During the hearings, Chief Justice John Roberts, along with key conservative justices, voiced skepticism about the argument that ghost gun kits are not firearms. Roberts' questioning underscored the intent behind selling these kits, suggesting that their clear purpose as easily assembled weapons aligns them with the need for regulation. His stance, along with comments from other conservative justices, indicated a potential shift in the court's willingness to address this modern gun control issue. The Supreme Court's decision, expected to have far-reaching implications, will either uphold the Biden administration's regulatory rule or leave the ghost gun loophole open. A ruling in favor of the administration could set a new precedent for regulating emerging firearm technologies, while a ruling against it could further complicate efforts to control the spread of untraceable guns. This case is a key test of how the court navigates the balance between individual gun rights and the government's responsibility to ensure public safety in an era of rapidly advancing gun technology. Don't forget to share your thoughts on this topic in the comments below, and if you're interested in learning more about gun control and the Second Amendment, be sure to check out our video on the history of gun laws in the United States.